welcome to the Apologetic Dog, where it's our heart's desire to contend for the gospel of grace. I'm your host, Jeremiah Nortier. If this is your first time checking out the Apologetic Dog, how have you not seen this channel before? I'm just kidding. Something I'm always, thrilled to explain to everyone about is what is embedded in the logo of the Apologetic Dog is 1 Timothy 6, verse 20. Well, this is a verse that tells us that we are to contend for the gospel of grace, and we do so by not standing on worldly philosophy or leaning on our own thoughts and opinions. But Paul tells Timothy to avoid irreverent babble and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge. And so if you want truth, if you want encouragement, if you want insight to the world around us, well, we go to God's word, the God of truth who has revealed to us who he is and who we are. So thank you so much for tuning in this evening. Really looking forward to covering a number of things. I just want to tell you, thank you so much for your support. I also serve as a pastor and elder at 12-5 Church in Jonesboro, Arkansas. That is Northeast Arkansas. So if you're ever in the area, please come check out our fellowship. You can check us out at 125church.com. And like I said, thank you so much if you are a regular listener, supporter of the Apologetic Dog. I always covet your prayers. And so if you're like, man, I would love to be able to help out Jeremiah in some way, please pray. Pray that God would open opportunities for the gospel to go forth and we contend for the Christian worldview. And if you're somebody that wants to support the Apologetic Dog, you can become a YouTube member. I have a few episodes that will be launching this week for YouTube membership and Patreon. So please consider that if you would like to support the Apologetic Dog. Also, you can also go to the Apologetic Dog website where, like I said, there are ways to just donate to the ministry if the Lord lays that on your heart. But also, we have a merchandise tab. Oh my goodness. I have to brag on the babe of all babes because she's the one. She's the mastermind behind the Apologetic Dog website. And she's created, one of the fan favorites is the red sweatshirt here. But in honor of our live stream today, she has made a t-shirt for the choice meats. So anyway, she does a great job with that. We also have hats now. And she wanted me to tell y'all that, hey, if you want some hats, she's going to be experimenting a little bit with that. So the Apologetic Dog Pound is expanding with all of our stuff. And so, like I said, if you are interested in some of these things, go check out theapologeticdog.com and check out that merchandise. I'm also excited to announce that the Apologetic Dog has a new sponsor. Hold on one moment. And so we are working on a commercial, but I wanted to go ahead and share with you all who this sponsor is, and it is Squirrelly Joe's Coffee. And so check out Squirrelly Joe's. Just know that Squirrelly Joe Coffee is a Christian-ran coffee company. And like I said, I'll be doing some commercials where you can have essentially a code that will give you a discount. And ultimately, we want to support Christian companies, especially, I don't know about you, but I drink coffee every day. And so I really appreciated teaming up with Squirrely Joe's. Got to get a little caffeine going there. So yes, those are some things that if you want to support the Apologetic Dog ministry, definitely do that. And hello, everyone in the side chat. Yes, I have a super chat goal of if we could get 10 super chats. That's the goal tonight. I will most definitely be reaching out to the Flower Patch Kid himself, Dr. Leighton Flowers. I just want everyone to know. He said I could call him that. So please don't get mad at me. Why calling names? Listen, he said we prefer the Flower Patch Kids. So we recently had a debate. That's what I want to spend this live stream talking about, reflecting on the debate. It was incredible. I can't tell y'all how much fun I had. I will be doing a lot of live streams reviewing clips of that debate, some of my favorite moments, things like that. I figured today I could maybe answer some of y'all's questions that y'all have in the side chat. Want to thank you real quick to our super chats out there. Man, everyone wants to see another debate with me and Leighton Flowers, which to me, the reason why I would love to debate Dr. Flowers again is he's such a likable person. We talked a ton before the debate, and we were just cutting up, and we were there with the twitchy theologian, Jerry Duckworth, and we were just having a blast. And so Michael Rogers, he says 1 of 10. He wants to see that next debate happen. And so if y'all really do want to see another debate, I would love to. I learned I'd probably have to give Dr. Flowers an exchange opening statements, which, hey, I know debates have done that before, so to me, that would be totally fine. But I have some ideas of what Dr. Flowers would be interested in debating. So thank you, Michael, for your super chat. And Wesley Watkins, man. Sorry, bro. I was gonna try to see you at Koinonia Feast today. Let's get this chain started. What was your favorite part of the whole conference session, in or out? Well, I just want to let people know this is Wesley. He is a member at 12-5 Church. Love you, brother. Praying that you get healed. So we know what we're talking about there. Maybe this is a good place to start. You know what? I had one more announcement, actually. I had this on my queue over here. So, Wesley, we're going to come back to you real quick. So, like I said, one more announcement. I will be having a debate coming up here in March. So, yes, this would be important to inform y'all. Oh, man. Apparently I clicked on. I don't know what happened. Anyway, we'll just advertise like this. So, I will be on Iron Sharpens Iron with Chris Arnzen. And so I'll be debating a gentleman from the Church of Christ on baptism. Now, I thought I had the notes pulled up here. I actually had a technical difficulty before we got started. It's not going to work, but that's okay. I think it's going to be March 17th and 18th. Y'all can listen to my last live streams where I've talked about that a number of times. But yeah, so keep me in prayer for that. I'm really, this is a topic that is not new, but the gentleman that I will be debating, I do not really know anything about. And so I'm very hopeful that it will be a cordial exchange. And like I said, we'll be talking about baptism. And so that necessarily means we're going to have to define our terms. And once again, I have a new Bible software I'm trying to pull up, and so it is giving me fits on my end. So I will figure that out momentarily. Going back to Wesley Watkins. Let me pull up your comment again, sir. So let's see. You said, what was your favorite part of the whole conference? That's really hard to nail down because it is most definitely my debate with Leighton Flowers was my favorite. But there were so many other things because this conference was 6 debates. I think I was number 5 of 6 debates. And so even though my debate was my favorite part, I absolutely enjoyed getting to know the other debaters. I got to meet so many people that were just in attendance and came up to me and introduced themselves and let me know that they have been listeners for the Apologetic Dog for a couple years. And so, Wesley, it was all around wonderful just to kind of meet everybody. And I want to also say that, let's see, let me click that off. Okay, I think I maybe fixed my Bible software. Something else that happened was, so there was a number of Muslims at the debate conference. And so there were opportunities to interact with Muslims. No doubt they were there because there was 2 debates where one was Matt Slick. He was debating a Muslim on, was Jesus more than a prophet? Yes, he is, because he's God. And there were also Muslims there supporting Jake, the Muslim metaphysician. That was a wild debate. I think Marlon has already released that debate, so you'll have to definitely go check that out. Let's see. Like I said, I'm trying to get my Bible software queued up on my end. And so what I was wanting to say with all that was I got to talk to a Muslim gentleman. I forget his name, but he was very kind, very likable, and we got to talk about the gospel. And he had a lot of questions about Christianity, and you got to think those are ordained moments to be able to share the gospel with people. Something else, Wesley, that I really appreciated getting to do was there were a lot of Unitarians at the debate. If you know anything about Unitarians, is they vehemently oppose the Trinity. And so a lot of them were just hanging out. I think their MO is, let's just get along and ask questions. And so I remember I talked to a young gentleman about, we do not believe in the same God. In fact, he approached me and was just like, hey, I got a lot of questions. I'm kind of in the middle. And I realized very quickly when I started bringing up certain scriptures, trying to contend for the reality that the Father, Son, and Spirit are persons that are distinct, yet unified in the divine nature, he did the whole rigmarole. And I noticed in these conversations, you contend for the truth. You can say so many things, but then eventually you realize that they want to just be argumentative, which I love to argue. But I think what goes on with Unitarians, these cult-like groups, whether it be full preterism, whatever, they want to infuse themselves into the evangelical world. And so what I've learned, Wesley, is I'm just going to make sure that they're being consistent. They realize that we are believing in two separate gods. And then I start saying, evangelize me. Evangelize. I've already done mine. I've already told you that your soul is at stake. But it's so interesting how rarely will they say, this is a first-tier issue. They'll say, well, it's okay to be wrong on this. I'm like, it's okay to be wrong if Jesus is the creator or he's a part of the creation. So anyway, Wesley, thank you for your super chat. That was definitely a divine appointment, if you will, was just getting to interact with some of the Unitarians. Thank you so much for your $10 super chat. This is Alton. Alton, am I saying your name correctly? Let me know in the side chat, sir. Thank you so much for your $10 super chat. I got a text from the babe of all babes, so hold on just one moment. Let's see. Send them out to get Okay. The babe of all babes told me to be sure to look at her message on the side chat. Okay, let's see if I can pin hers. The Apologetic Dame says, if we get 15 super chats, see me, I'm just trying to throw 10 out there, but she says, no, we can keep going. She says, if we get 15 super chats, we will call out, I think she's using that we very loosely here. We will call out Dr. Flowers. Thank you, sir. The Tatted Theologian is a deacon at 12-5 Church, so thank you so much, brother, for all your love. So like I said, the aim of this super chat, you can tell what's really on my mind right now. And by the way, Alton says, give more super chats. Will a man rob God? Alton, I don't know you, sir, but you just tagged me in a post before we went live, and you said some kind things to me after reviewing the debate, so thank you for joining us this evening. And then Goal Shot Perfect. Please go subscribe to this young man, Goal Shot Perfect. He is also a member at 12-5 Church, and so he has a growing YouTube channel. I want to let everybody know, as I kind of talk about some of the highlights from the debate, I want to show you on my end in a little bit, I want to show you my questions that I was going to ask. I didn't get to ask all my questions to Dr. Flowers, and so I figured y'all would like to know some of what my debate prep looked like. The question is, where can you go watch the debate? Go to the Gospel Truth YouTube channel hosted by Marlon Wilson. And if you just type in Leighton Flowers versus Jeremiah Nortier, I'm sure it will pop up. But as we kind of go through what happened at the debate, what we were arguing about, I will also be taking your questions best I can. Y'all like to really have your own side discussions there, so it's hard for me to keep up. So you may have to preface it with Q, and I promise you, if you send a question or comment by Super Chat, I have a little program that starts flashing. So I see all of those. So yes, thank you so much. What up, Deneen? Deneen, I feel like I haven't seen you in the side chat in ages. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. And then someone said, she wins. You mean we win? Yes, in relation to my wife, because we are one. That is right. Okay. Well, I have a very kind comment I will post where y'all can see. Thank you, Eric, for joining us. So maybe this is a good way to kind of kick it off. Eric says, the way Jeremiah performed in that debate, I think he's a genius. He just doesn't know it yet. Well, I didn't realize that's what you were going to say. I just saw you said performance. So, what up, Caleb? Yeah, so definitely not a genius. Now, I can solve multiple different Rubik's Cubes, but that's just because I'm the guy. Listen, not a genius. I'm just the person that will do one thing way longer than everyone else. My wife can definitely tell you that. So, my daily schedule is, I'm a pastor at 12-5 Church, and so I spend about 5 hours a day reading and studying, locked in the kennel. And so I joke with my wife. I'm like, I think I might be on the spectrum a little bit because not everyone reads for 5 hours straight. So, yes, thank you for everyone for joining in. Thank you once again, Eric, for the kind words. So, yeah, today I just want to kind of talk about the debate with Dr. Flowers. I guess it would be kind of cool to pull up the graphic maybe. So Dr. Leighton Flowers, as you know, he is the king of the provisionists. And so I don't know if y'all know this, but Leighton would claim not to be Arminian. Just-in-time dumpster rentals. What's up? All right, so got to do a shameless plug here for just-in-time dumpster rentals. If you are in the Northeast Arkansas area and you need some trash dumped, then hit up just-in-time dumpsters. So thank you for joining us. So let me pull up Marlon's channel because, like I said, the Gospel Truth is who hosted Marlon Wilson. Yeah, there we go. And so it aired this last Friday, but we debated a weekend ago, right? It was on a Saturday. It was live and in person right here. If y'all can see it on y'all's end. And so I just want to brag on Marlon. This was a fantastic venue that he set up. It was great. What up? Another Eric, who is a member of the Apologetic Dog. Just got my Apologetic Dog merch in the mail the other day. Well, thank you, sir, for the support. And so this was an in-person debate. I want to let everyone know, doing online debates, way different feel from doing in-person debates. Now, this was like my fourth in-person debate, and I want to say it really correlates with preaching in person, so just having a comfortability speaking in front of people. But honestly, being prepared helps the most because, yes, I have people asking, what's the nerves like? I want to brag on my buddy Eli Yala. This was his first in-person debate, and he did fantastic. I said, Eli, you're a teacher, at a private school, teaches logic, apologetics, things like that. I said, but you're a gifted speaker. You're very prepared, and so it is not going to be hard debating somebody. And I think Eli has a sports background too, and I've told people I have a basketball background, and so when I get those jitters, those butterflies before tip-off, but once I saw the ball go up, the whole crowd would just disappear in my mind. So debating is so similar, and yes, we are on a quest for truth, something that Dr. Flowers kind of insinuated. Love him to pieces, but it felt like he was insinuating I was trying to just one-up him and maybe not be on a quest for truth. And I got accused of using a debate tactic. We're going to get into that a little bit more. What up, an unapologetic cat? We meet again out there, my arch nemesis. Let's see. An unapologetic cat said, Jeremiah did really well in the debate against Flowers for someone who is alleged to have eaten glue as a kid. Do you see what I have to put up with? The side chat with you people. Anyway, this was a fantastic debate. But yeah, just kind of getting accused of being disingenuous as a debate tactic. I just want to let everybody know 100% I had a tactic. It's called a game plan. And this is the thing. Dr. Flowers had a tactic too. He brought, he showed up with his notes. And what was really weird, if you watch, hopefully you watched the debate, at the very end, someone in the side chat says, "Oh no, not using debate tactics in a debate of all places. How could you?" This is my thought. I don't know what was going on in Dr. Flowers' mind, but at least that. And so he actually said to me afterwards, he's like, "Hey, yeah, I made the tactic comment. Please take it as a compliment." And I just was like, "Dr. Flowers," I said, "I'm having the time of my life. You could say anything you want, and it's okay." But yeah, and then he said, but he was implying we didn't exchange openings when we never discussed that. So it's just kind of weird what was on his mind at the very end. Anyway, you see all the scatterbrainness that I got going on. So if you haven't checked out the debate, you can go to The Gospel Truth here with Marlon Wilson. I just want to let people know he invited me to do my very first debate maybe 4 years ago at this point. And if you go deep, deep, deep in the archives, you'll find Jeremiah Nortier's first debate with a Mormon. So many of you probably know this by now. But how I got roped into debating on the Gospel Truth is I sent Marlon a message on Facebook Messenger, and I was really nervous because I thought, man, Marlon's this famous debate hosting guy, and is he even going to message me back? Messaged me back really quick, and I asked him. I just said, "Hey, love the channel. I learned so much from debates, and one thing I said, I have a suggestion for a debate. I would really like to see you have somebody debate somebody from the Church of Christ on baptism. I'd really like to see that debate go down." And he messaged me back and said, "Oh, that's a great idea. Oh, by the way, would you like to debate a Mormon?" And I remember sitting in my chair thinking, oh my goodness, I've never actually considered debating before. But I told him, sure, let's do it. So, bada bing, bada boom, I debated that gentleman a number of years ago. Had a blast doing it. I guess I got the itch. I was like, man, I'm totally hooked. And so people don't know this, but my early debates, Sola Scriptura gave a $5 super chat. Yo, dog, it was great spending the weekend with you and the dame. Well, thank you. Please let me know who you are. Yeah, sometimes I really struggle with names. So you probably told me at the conference, but everyone that I got a chance to talk to was fantastic. So kind of going back to Marlon's channel. So I debated a Mormon, and we kind of it was a debate light, multiple discussions. It was fantastic. Go check that out. And I think my second debate was against an Eastern Orthodox fellow, and we debated sola fide. And then I think my third debate was against a Roman Catholic on one of the Marian dogmas. So yeah, flow over to The Gospel Truth, subscribe to him, check out my buddy Eli Ayala. He runs a YouTube channel called Revealed Apologetics, and he did fantastic job for his first debate. And so yeah, I was kind of relating this back to me is I have a little bit of experience under my belt, and so did Dr. Flowers. And so I had the highest expectations of us having a cordial interaction. And as you see, it was on, is election conditional or unconditional? So yes. So if you, there will be many spoilers, but many of y'all hopefully have watched the debate. So with that being said, thank you all for your super chat. I saw maybe a question in the super chat before we kind of get started. Like I said, I want to show y'all my notes of what I named them potential questions. And then I also want to talk about my game plan, my tactic that I am so unashamed telling people. Yes, I had a tactic, but before we do that, let's hear this commercial from our sponsor, Snake Crusher. Hey guys, quick question. When's the last time that your beard actually glorified God? Because if you're looking like John the Baptist out in the wilderness, we got problems. That's why I use Snake Crusher, which is the only men's grooming line that says, I love Jesus and I condition daily. They've got natural beard oil, pomade, and tattoo balm, all handcrafted by a guy who dropped 200 pounds, started crushing snakes, and
temptation.
So if your beard smells like regret and motor oil, repent and hit up Snake Crusher Products online and let them know that the Apologetic Dog sent you. Even the dog approves. And so that was from Snake Crusher Beard Oil. Let me know, was the volume okay on that? I've had people say, Jeremiah, your voice is just so soft. And then you blast your commercials. And so I'm trying to work on that. It might have been too soft. Let me know if the sound was okay. Yes, this is with Matt Morkin. He runs the Snake Crusher company. I was going to say he's the Snake Crusher, but Snake Crusher is a reference to Jesus Christ, right in Genesis 3:15, the proto-evangelion, where we know the gospel promise is that Christ, he crushes the head of the snake. He did that at Calvary. And I believe it's Romans 16, verse 20, that talks about how the church, we also partake in crushing the serpent's head by preaching the gospel and being a means of kingdom expansion. And so the commercial was a little bit quiet, but that's much preferred to the eardrum blasting. What up? Thank you so much for joining in. And so, yeah, I thought someone had a question about, maybe repost. Someone said something about dodging. So let me maybe type that in. Yeah, so this is the question. Let me put it on here for y'all. Maybe this is a good one to start with. Why did Flowers dodge the disembodied glory commentary? He knew what that entails. Instead of pushing back, he passed, and that looked bad. Well, obviously, y'all can be judges on, what you think of the debate. You know what? I'm going to answer this question in a little bit because we're most definitely, that's one of my favorite parts of the debate. He said, Jeremiah, I've never heard of disembodied glory. It wasn't in his closing statement. He looked in the crowd. He's kind of, he was really kind of moving like this. And he said, who else has heard of disembodied glory? And everybody in the Apologetic Dog t-shirts that are red, all of them just, raising their heads. And he goes, of course you Calvinists have heard it. And I wonder, so obviously that's a kind of made-up term, disembodied glory, but it's to press the point that is his view of Romans 8, verse 30. So yeah, we will definitely get into that. I just want to thank everybody for your super chat. Sola Scriptura, thank you again. Snake Crusher is Matt Morkin, wonderful brother. He's a Presbyterian. God love him. We try to talk about the covenants. We got to meet this past conference, and he took me out to dinner. We got to hang out here, and he introduced me to his friend. Let me make sure I say his last name properly. Aaron Wright. He had a booth right next to the Apologetic Dog, and he was selling tons of books. Oh my goodness, I could not believe that he probably had the biggest YouTube channel of the whole conference, and nobody knew it. And so I want to, yes, here we go. So he runs the YouTube channel Grace Family Baptist Church. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me doing this plug for him. But Matt Morkin introduced me to his buddy Aaron. And oh my goodness, y'all have to go check out. I sent him a video of how did the Apologetic Dog become Calvinist. He uploaded that like 5 hours ago. Y'all will get a kick out of what I said there. But anyway, I got to meet this brother of a great, he's an elder at this church where Bodie Baucham was serving at. I think I got those details right. But anyway, go check that out as well. So Sola Scriptura, thank you for your super chat. And I guess before we dive in, something that I'm very interested in debating Dr. Flowers on, and I guess time will tell. Yeah, Eric says he loves that channel. So, like I said, Aaron Wright, he is the one that edits that channel, uploads to it. I got to meet him, and I got his number on speed dial because your boy got some questions about YouTube shorts. So let me know in the chat. So after really studying Dr. Flowers' position, one of his claim to fame is Romans 9 led him out of Calvinism. And I think what he says is Calvinists misunderstand the doctrine of total depravity because really those verses are about judicial hardening. And I can just tell you, we don't misunderstand those. Those are about the nature of men. Now, context determines that, but Romans talks about both. What kind of judicial pronouncement happened with Adam? We will get to that because it's on my question sheet that I actually did ask Leighton. And I think it was my last question. I never got an answer for, by the way. But let me know what you think. I would like to debate Leighton Flowers on judicial hardening because that's his whole thing. If you go back and listen to his debate with Dr. White on Romans 9, I think it was like 2016, I remember he asked Dr. White questions about judicial hardening, and Dr. White gave some really good answers, I thought. But I've only had time to think about the things that Leighton has said all of these years. So that's one thing that I would be interested in debating Dr. Flowers on is judicial hardening. And, you know, he kind of issued a challenge to Dr. White years ago debating, don't call it, babe, I'm just talking about things that I would be interested in debating. See, she's like, hey, we got 5 more super chats to go. I do want to just let everyone know, thank you so much again for your super chats. And if you haven't already, please like this video. Please share any of the content of the Apologetics ministry if it's been helpful to you. You know, I say those things that feel a little bit self-serving, but I've learned it actually helps the YouTube algorithm a whole lot if you like, share, subscribe. And so if you do those things, thank you so much. Where was I? If we get to 10 super chats according to the Apologetic Dame, something that I would like to potentially one day debate Dr. Flowers on is, like I said, judicial hardening. I think he would actually sign up for that. We might have to exchange opening statements. But something he called Dr. White out on to debate years ago was on Cornelius. And I've always remembered that. I don't know if y'all, let me know in the side chat if y'all remember Leighton asking White to debate in Acts 10 on Cornelius, because in the Calvinist Arminian discussions, even though Leighton would be a provisionist, you know, we would say the unregenerate cannot please God, because that's what Romans chapter 8 says early on. And then the debate kind of devolves into, well, what about Cornelius? Didn't he pray and God hear his prayer? It's like we need to look at that passage very carefully. And so thank y'all so much for your super chats. Georgia K, which she has been a supporter of the Apologetic Dog for a while. So thank you so much, girl. Like I said, can't wait for the day you get to meet Allie Nortier in person. And Eric says, if I give 5 separate times, does that count towards the 10 super chats? Take that up with the Apologetic Dame, because apparently she is the one getting to call the shots when it comes to all that. But obviously, y'all know this is just a way for y'all to support the ministry, and I thank y'all so much for that. So, judicial hardening, that's something I'm interested in debating. Flowers, I can't officially challenge him yet, according to the Babe of All Babes. And then also, Cornelius. Can someone who's unregenerate do something pleasing to God? I do not think Leighton and his understanding of God-fearers will actually be able to crack the Calvinist case wide open. So, with that being said, do y'all remember what my opening statement was about? Just testing y'all's memory. Tell me in the side chat. Do y'all remember? Does anybody remember what my 10-minute opener was all about? It was said so many times throughout the rest of the entire debate. Let's see. There we go. So y'all remember this was on the golden chain of redemption. So I want to talk about a few things. I want to talk about my debate tactic, because apparently that's a dirty word to some people, which was my strategy, my game plan. What up? Yeah, Romans 8, the golden chain. Y'all know what's up. So you got to think, me and Leighton, we were texting when, the twitchy theologians in the house. Thank you, sir, for joining. Let's see. Yeah, so you know what's wild? I tried my best to get this lined up for y'all to be able to read, but my margins just do not want to work with me. I promise I'll get it straightened up here. All right, I think that'll get the job done. Okay. Yeah, so kind of a little bit of build up to this debate. So Marlon Wilson recruited me. He said, hey, what do you think about debating Dr. Flowers? I said, I'm pretty sure that was predestined before the foundation of the world because I've been listening to him since I was 19, around in there. So you got to think, I've been listening to Dr. Flowers ever since I listened to him debate James White, like 2016-ish. So I can't remember exactly how old I was, but it was fantastic. And sorry, I have my phone right here, and it constantly is buzzing, and I get thrown off. Anyway, so when Marlon asked me if I wanted to debate Flowers, I said yes so fast, I'm pretty sure my head was spinning. And so I got Dr. Flowers' number, and so one thing I really wanted to do was let him know that I love him dearly. I think he preaches the gospel of grace, and I consider him as a brother. And so I tell Calvinists, you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself. If you're calling him a rank heretic outside the fold, it's like, look, I know we're all passionate about the sovereignty of God, but you got to be able to breathe. You got to be able to go from cage stage to sage stage. And so I'll be honest, I went through that whole process myself back in college. What up, Matthew? Matthew says, awesome debate, man. Thanks for making me look deeper into Romans 8, although you definitely cheated. What does that mean? He sent a $10 super chat and said I cheated. So please tell me how. How did I cheat? Is it because I got to read this book? I will say touche if you mean that I read Dr. Flowers' book very, very carefully. And so why you, Matthew, tell me why I cheated. I want to tell y'all something funny. I found a spelling error in Dr. Flowers' book. And so I sent a picture of it to Dr. Flowers. And I said, what kind of new teaching is this? I didn't say, what kind of new heresy is this? But he got a good laugh out of it. And he actually said, I found 3 spelling errors in Dr. James White's book. And I didn't feel comfortable enough to tell him about that. Oh, someone said I cheated because I quoted his book. Yeah. Y'all are wild out there. Oh, Matthew, don't do it, man. Matthew said, you should have given him your cheat sheet to Flowers before the debate. Just kidding. Dude, you are hilarious. And I believe, like I said, we got to meet at the debate. Me and Matthew, I think Matthew's been on the channel before, and I want to just say, me and Matthew disagree on a number of things, but hopefully we were able to model how to disagree in love. So thank you, brother, for iron sharpening iron. And I'll be honest, that is what I tried to accomplish during the debate with Dr. Flowers. So where was I? So me and Flowers, we were texting, what should we debate on? And I basically said, I'm game for whatever. And we both ruled out the atonement just because me and James White did that 2-on-2 debate probably about a year ago now. And so he said, would you like to debate on unconditional election? I almost said no because he just debated White on John 6:44. But here's the thing. I really appreciated him saying, hey, let's make it into a question, is election conditional or unconditional? I liked his suggestion there because that means that he had to defend his view and I had to make a positive case and defend my view as well. So DW, thank you so much for your super chat. If Romans 8:29 and 30 speaks only of past saints, how does verse 29 give Paul's audience a present assurance? Wouldn't it just be describing what God has done for others? Yeah, so we'll go ahead and touch on that now, because this is the kind of question that Flowers wanted me to ask, because he addresses it in his book. I tell people, I read this just so you wouldn't have to, but I say that tongue in cheek. But yeah, he gets into this. So Flowers has three major arguments for why verse 29 and 30 is referring to past saints, okay? So I'm just going to give you the three arguments because he would actually tell you it's his view that gives Christians today more assurance. Okay, so he would say this is talking about Christians today. Definitely in Paul's time, but the application is us today, and we know. Okay, this is important in his argumentation here because he says in verse 9, you have the far demonstrative, I think it's a relative pronoun, and meaning there's a shift in the context right here for those. So he would say, and we know as Christians, and now Paul is wanting us to look at those in the past. So getting to your question, DW, it's so funny. Leighton gives an analogy, and I'll try to recall it here in a second. So after Paul gives us God's rap sheet, his credentials, his analogy, not mine, about how he is faithful to saints of the past, then it returns to Christians again. What then shall we say to these things? And so what Leighton tries to say, I got to tell you the analogy he gives to prove this point, but he's really playing with the focus of Paul's saying. He's talking about Christians. He shifts to saints of the past, and then he shifts back to Christians. And then his whole point is we can have such a great assurance because God has been faithful with those in the past. And so, just so you know, I didn't want to ask a question like that because I've heard him time and time again kind of say, well, listen, it's like this. This is the analogy that he gives in his book pertaining to that very question. Imagine you have a pastor search committee, and you're looking for a pastor. You're looking through a bunch of resumes, and then you find someone who gives you a list of their credentials of their past, things that they've done in the past. Well, it gives you assurance now to hire them. And I remember reading this, and I was like, I was like, no, that's not the analogy going on here. But thank you for that because, like I said, the more y'all ask me questions in the side chat, say things like that, super chats that I see, it triggers my memory on so many things that I like sharing with y'all. So yeah, that's his first big argument is the shift in focus from we know and for those, okay? And so I'll just go ahead and tell you kind of the other big arguments. And this is the one that you heard in the debate, is the aorist verb. So foreknew is in the aorist verb. Predestined, that's mentioned twice here, is aorist. And when I say aorist, we usually translate it into past tense, okay? But when you do a deep study on aorist tense, it's not necessarily in relation to time. Context gets to determine what it means. And context, some might accuse me of using a tactic of trying to say, hey, there's a whole context leading up to the golden chain. Anyway, and so the five aorist verbs are foreknew, predestined, called, justified, and glorified. So this was my opening statement. Those are my five major points, is discussing these aorist verbs that God is doing. And then y'all heard my 2-minute challenge to Flowers of saying, hey, why is this only past tense again? Have you thought about where that leads? I don't think you have, but you better get ready for some cross-examination on it. But anyway, his book says, since these are in the past tense, which they're the aorist, they're not necessarily past tense, he says, since it's past tense, then that is evidence for past saints. And if you've taken kind of entry-level Greek, one of the biggest things that you are told is don't make a theological case on the tense of nouns or verbs, but it really is a fundamental thing to say, hey, context gets to determine how verbs are used and, all those things. So anyway, so these are two arguments. The shift in focus, the we know to for those, and then the aorist verbs that he would say are past tense, therefore are referring to past saints. And then this was kind of the sneaky point that y'all heard me hammer, is he says, now, man, I may quote this to y'all in his book because I think I remember what page it's on. But this is a verse that he says preachers should not preach this today. I almost quoted this in his book to y'all because, like I said, I was very disappointed with this. So on page 90, I'm going to go ahead and read this. Dr. Flowers says, in contrast to Old Testament saints, a modern-day preacher would not teach that we are being conformed to Christ's image so that Jesus might be the firstborn among many brethren, because we know him to already be the firstborn of many brethren. Our being conformed into Christ's image today has nothing to do with the future coming of Christ's birth, whereas the saints of old were a part of his very lineage. It is through the life of men like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, and many other saints of old that Christ is brought into this world, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And so I don't know if you're catching what he's saying, but he thinks the Greek construction of firstborn, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers, he says this is evidence for brothers in the past. And I actually want to give him some props. If he can sell you on this, well, he's really set you up for his understanding of Romans chapter 9. If he can get you to think that the golden chain is past saints, mainly the patriarchs, Abraham, past believing Israel, well, then think about, he's just set you on a trajectory for Romans chapter 9, right? Which is brilliant, because as Calvinists, a lot of times we'll jump straight into Romans chapter 9, right? And then he will kind of say, oh, Mr. Calvinist, you don't understand the buildup of what Paul is saying in this. And so when he starts sprinkling in a little bit of Romans 8, he has a very unique view. I mean, it's less than 1% of people. As I was looking at the scholars that he was citing, they did not even believe the golden chain like him. He was just kind of quoting a portion of it. And if he sees that and says, like who? N.T. Wright. He quoted all throughout. And N.T. does not agree with Dr. Flowers on that, along with many other people. What up, Michelle? Out there. I don't know if I saw you, everyone. So she missed the alert. Well, we're so glad that you were here now. And so, where was I? So when I was reading that quote, for one, he was saying preachers don't preach this today. I thought, oh, man, I do not think Dr. Flowers has really looked into prototokos, what it means that Jesus is firstborn. And so, like I said, I'm going to pause because he just says that this is evidence for past saints. So here in a little bit, we will get into how I was like, by no means. So yeah, with that, I want to maybe give y'all a moment. Did I miss any questions in the side chat? Because like I said, I want to be interactive with y'all. Maybe I can touch on this a little bit. I'll post it for y'all to see. Hoover says, why claim all the verses leading up to verses 29 and 30 and after say we and us? How can we claim it does not apply to us? What then shall we say to these things? Okay, you're making a good point, but I know what Flowers says to that very question. He addresses it in his book. I've heard, I cannot stress to y'all the hours and hours that I listened leading up to this debate. Now, something else that a lot of people don't know is I spent the whole month of October preparing for this debate. So this was months back. Oh, and I need to tell you this. So Dr. Flowers in the debate basically said, yeah, Jeremiah knew last night we talked about eschatology. He knows I don't know eschatology. And it's almost like he was implying that I made my tactic, my strategy from last night, the Friday night into the day of. And I just want to let people know, I read his entire book. So he's written 3 books that I know of. He's also written a children's book. I've not read that. But his 3 theological books, I've read 2 of them back in October, and I knew back in October how, and I was telling people, you can ask Twitchy, I said, I know how I'm going to crack provisionism wide open. And what's so funny is Twitchy can be a witness. He said, Jeremiah, these are so good insights, and I have to be quiet about it all the way, until your debate. And I was like, yes, please do not say anything. Allie says, call him out. All right. Tell Dr. Flowers, somebody reach out to him, let him know that I'm interested in debating him on judicial hardening. Ask him Jeremiah would be willing to give, call him out. Tell him I'll even give my opening statement to him. Yeah, so, yeah. So I prepped. I did a lot of reading and research. Why am I a small window? I did a lot of reading research in October, and that's when I was calling Twitchy. It's funny, we were at Disney World, and I remember Twitchy called me, and I was so excited I had to tell him some things. Where was I? Oh, and then I had to put studying for Dr. Flowers on pause because I needed 2 months, November and December, to prepare for the hyper-preterist debate. Go check that out, but you're going to see a different version of Jeremiah punching wolves in the mouth, as I like to say to people. And so then I had to resume my study for Dr. Flowers for the month of January. So I just wanted to give kind of a backdrop to say, yeah, I didn't do anything sneaky, tactical overnight. And I'm about to show y'all the things that I've had typed out for a while in preparation for Dr. Flowers. And I want you to know something I realized with reading his book was, I don't want to be mean saying this, but you know how I think it's James White that says that Flowers is a one-string banjo. Over time, you start to wonder, is that the only thing he talks about is anti-Calvinism? And so Soteriology 101 is a misnomer of a name because it's not laying the foundation of the fundamentals of how to be saved. It is a anti-perspective and anti-Calvinist resource. And I'm sure you've noticed it. People do have bad experiences with the doctrines of grace. Maybe they met a cage stager, or they went through a church split where people differed over doctrine. Yes, Alton said, support Twitchy's new book. Let's put that for everyone to see. Thank you for the super chat there. And so my point is, so anti-ministries, they don't equip you like in terms of encouragement. They're just kind of a safe haven for you to stop by, when you need some assurance that, oh man, I feel bad, I don't like these things. Oh, there's someone out there that's basically dedicated their life's work to saying that the Reformed heritage is wrong. And so where I'm going with this is, in preparing for my debate, you all have to understand, I have been studying eschatology, and I'm very, what do you mean by cage stage? Eric, what I mean is by what I experienced in my own life, is meaning when you're born again by God's sovereign grace, when you see Christ for who he is, your heart is regenerated and you love him, everything is different, right? All things are made new, as Paul says. And then you start studying the word, and, you start, realizing that God is sovereign, and maybe somebody can help contextualize the sovereignty of God in the 5 points. And usually what happens, this was me. So this is what I'm referring to the cage stage as myself. And Allie's given her version of it too, is, you can't chill. You have to tell everyone about the 5 points of Calvinism, and it's usually in terms of arguing with them, telling them why they're wrong, and it's not your free will that ultimately saved you. And we say you're better off staying in a cage so you don't hurt yourself and you don't hurt others. And so Allie said, cage stage is a baby Calvinist who feels the need to fight everyone in the beginning on chapter, verses, and has no chill. So, babe, I'm going to tell a story. So this is a story where I'm so proud of her, even though she may have different feelings about the story. I'm going to tell it and see what she thinks. She probably knows. By the way, Unapologetic Cat says, I think cage stage is a dog thing. Cats, man. Cats. So I remember early on in our marriage, me and Allie, I think you remember this. We were in the living room, and Allie had tears in her eyes because I think I was teaching on one of the doctrines from church. We were talking, and she just said, Jeremiah, why are we talking so much about John Calvin? I thought that we serve Jesus Christ. And I was so proud of her because it reminded me we have to be careful of labels. We got to be careful with how we say it. And the whole point of the doctrines of grace is point pointing to the sovereign grace of God and his majesty. I don't know if I can change the arrow thingy, Allie. So her question was, why are we talking so much about this man named John Calvin? I thought we are followers of Jesus. It was such a good moment, a reminder of me to reminding people, if we do use labels, we need to ultimately point everything back to Jesus Christ. And so I got to tell her, the acrostic tulip, these are just kind of tools to help teach us theology. But most assuredly, those that hold to the doctrines of grace, that the goal is to say it is God who transforms the heart, and soli Deo Gloria, God gets all the glory alone. So it was just such a wonderful teaching moment for my bride to be able to say, hey, everything is about glorifying Jesus Christ, worshiping him, putting our faith alone in him. But it's also a reminder to me that we need to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves. And before we quote John Calvin and things like that, we need to be able to go to Scripture, for crying out loud. We need to be able to point to verses that show God's work in salvation. And so Goal Shot Perfect says, question, hey dog, what app do you use to live stream? I was thinking of live streaming, but I don't know what app to use. We use Ecamm Live. In fact, at church, ask me again, and it's the same one that we use at the booth. So thank you for that question. Go subscribe to Goal Shot Perfect if you haven't. So good question on asking, what is a cage stage Calvinist? And that's just someone, like my wife said, has no chill. And so I do resonate with this thought, though. Coming in contact with the sovereignty of God and the 5 points of Calvinism and seeing it grounded in Scripture, not just because Calvin said it or the canons of Dort or Charles Spurgeon, blah, blah, blah. It really is like a born again experience. And all I say that to mean is, when you are born again, everything is made new. And then when you realize the steps that you are taking have been ordained / predestined before the foundation of the world, you have this high view of God, that he is sovereign. He has a purpose for whatever comes to pass, and it's not about you. And so my point is, Calvinism proper, the doctrines of grace proper, changes everything because you have a lofty view of God. I think it was John MacArthur that says the higher view that you have of God, the lower view you have of yourself, and that magnifies worship to the only one who deserves all the honor and praise. And so, thank you so much for all of your questions so far. Reformed Biblicist. Props on that name, because I don't know if people know that biblicist is sometimes a no-no word. Reformed Biblicist says, I will give people the sovereignty of God by A.W. Pink as a Christmas present. Hashtag cage stager for 10 plus years. Y'all got to see this comment. That is hilarious. Let me see if I can put this up. Yeah, and by the way, the book that he's recommending, if y'all go on the archives, I think there's a book, or there's a video that I said, books you must read. And I see it. It's over there. I don't want y'all to, I don't want to have to stand up and y'all see my PJs. But A.W. Pink's book on the sovereignty of God and the attributes of God, that was just such a great book. Yep, A.W. Pink is awesome. I have 12 at least. Yeah, so I want to say, I do have a critique. I mean, you got to, if you're thinking critically, then you're always going to have disagreements with authors, theologians, but that's a good thing. Iron sharpens iron. And so, like I said, I have my disagreements with Pink, but all in all, fantastic resource. Michelle says, the Doctrine of Election by A.W. Pink is excellent. Yes. And I think another book he wrote was The Doctrine of the Holy Spirit, The Doctrine of Sanctification. All those, like I said, Pink just was awesome with kind of codifying all of these deep doctrines. Okay, the Attributes of God by Pink is amazing. It was really impactful in my life. Amen to that. Okay, so back to when I debated the Flower Patch Kid. And I just want to remind people, he said I could say that because it's all in good fun. So Marlon recruited me to debate Dr. Flowers. And Dr. Flowers was the one that essentially said, hey, do you want to debate a question? Is God's choice to elect an individual for salvation conditional or unconditional, something like that? And so when Marlon sent us the debate format, he said that we're only going to have a 10-minute opening statement. So you can't do hardly jack in 10 minutes, if you ask me. So I'm a preacher, and you're giving me 10 minutes to make my case for unconditional election? And so I spent a while because many months ago, I forget when Marlon texted us, I remember I was at the Tennessee Apologetics Conference, and I was interviewing Nate Sala, and I was telling him about this debate coming up, and he said, Jeremiah, where are you going to go with Leighton Flowers? And just off the cuff, I said, Romans 9 probably is where I'm going to have to debate Dr. Flowers at, and I knew it was going to take a lot of deep contemplation because he knows, he wrote a whole book premised around the potter's promise in the clay. So like literally he has hands around the potter, right? Around the clay. And so that never sat well with me good. I'm just like, man, how am I going to present something that Leighton has thought about 100 different ways? You know what I mean? So thank you, James, for the $10 super chat. Love the debate. If you want to understand Romans 9, you have to understand Romans 8. I loved all of the clips that are going to be coming from the debate, or I should say, I love all the one-liners. And so I said a few things that I hope resonate with people. One was, man is not God. Like that. I know I got called for special pleading, but I think he who has an ear to hear understands that, listen, how you choose and do things and relate to other people is not the same way that God does things. So that was a line. And I said that in my opening statement, didn't I? Essentially saying, if you want to understand, okay. So thank you. That actually helps me get my train of thought. So as I was preparing my opening statement, I was like, 10 minutes. Where is the punch? Like, where am I really going to set the tone of the debate? Well, I just want to let y'all know, if y'all do have this book, it's page 92, where Dr. Flowers, remember I read from the quote that I read earlier, but you got to think, my mind is highly sensitive to eschatology in a good way. I'm very charitable if you're premillennial, all-millennial, post-millennial. But if you ever say anything that fringes on full preterism, it's like I have little alert bells. I'm like, And so on page 92, this was the sentence on Leighton's commentary on Romans 8:30 that I finally knew what my opening statement was going to be about. Yeah, Twitchy's post-mill. Yeah, we're still trying to work on that. So Leighton Flowers said that these individuals, talking about, remember the aorist verbs here, right? The for those whom God foreknew, predestined, and so forth. He says these are the individuals whom God called, justified, and who now, even as Paul was writing these words, and here's the thing I have underlined, are already glorified in the presence of God. And I remember scratching my head like, Abraham has not received the redemption of the body. And so you may be like, well, how do you know that that's the glorified being talked about there? And so I remember this came up in the debate. So one, I don't have it queued up, but one resource I would love to recommend to everybody is Thomas Schreiner's commentary on the book of Romans along with Douglas Moo. But Thomas Schreiner said verse 18, so you see the glory here. He said verse 18 is a bookend along with verse 30. So verse 18, you got the glory here. And even this passage in the ESV says future glory. Ding, ding, ding. But this is building up, and to those whom God justified, he also glorified. And so when Dr. Flowers said that these former saints are glorified in the presence of God as Paul is writing these words, I'm like, uh-oh. So verse 18 talks about the glory. That's a bookend. So the glory that's being mentioned here, everything that's being described is talking about the glory in the aorist tense in verse 30. It's talking about the same thing. And so if you know much about Romans 8, verse 23 says that not only creation, so this is really important for the context because the whole creation is groaning. It has been corrupted and subject to futility. So let's just back up. For creation was subject to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that creation itself will be set free from the bondage to corruption and attain freedom of the glory of the children of God. So remember, I'm going to mention this. What up, Sparky? Sparky gave her sophisticated analysis of the debate. She said I did okay. No, she said she appreciated the debate, so thank you. So Romans 4:13 talks about Abraham and his offspring being heirs to the world, and that is what Paul is talking about here is a future inheritance where the world or creation will no longer be cursed by sin per Genesis 3. So you got to think all this is entailed in the doxa, the glory. And by the way, you notice, and we'll get to this hopefully here in a little bit, is this is connected with verse 17. And somebody said that I only quoted half of verse. I just got to say, the comments are wild. People telling me that I veered the debate off. That was one of my favorite comments is when people said Jeremiah changed the debate topic. I'm like, oh yeah? Then why did Dr. Flowers write about these things in his book trying to disprove Calvinism? And oh yeah, is the golden chain not up for discussion? And for people saying, yeah, but you talked about glory, you didn't talk about unconditional election. And I'm like, okay, this is my thought anyway. I'm sharing it with y'all. Well, was Leighton wrong for debating me and cross-examining me on the Lapsarian controversy? Oh, he's not proving conditional election when he's asking me about the Lapsarian controversy. Here's the thing. A lot of people aren't debaters. They don't understand that when you cross-examine somebody, you're putting their view under scrutiny. And to me, it is hard cope when people say that, oh yeah, Jeremiah just went totally off script from the debate. I can only hope that people understand the golden chain is a major proof passage of where we see God doing these things in salvation. Now, Leighton is not a classic Arminian. So yeah, I adapted my debate argumentation geared towards splitting provisionism wide open. I get that classic Arminians are going to be like, Leighton, you shouldn't agree to foreknew being foreloved in a personal relationship. Yeah, he's actually agreeing with the Calvinist on that point, Leighton is. And that's why classic Arminians should tell Leighton, hey, do not get on that train because that train is going one way and it ends in eschatological glory. Oh yeah, where was I? So when we're defining the glory in verse 18, remember, my position is that this is a bookend with verse 30, the golden chain. And so this glory right here is also talking about verse 23, and not only creation, but Christians. So in Leighton's book, he says that this is a Christian context here. Remember, the only change in the subject is in verse 29 and 30 out of nowhere, right? And I would say, yeah, the shift is we can trust that God keeps his promises because he's told us that he is going to save all believers of all time. Anyway, verse 23 says, and we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit, that's actually a really important term here, and I'll explain, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, and here's the key, the redemption of our bodies. So here's the thing. And me and Twitchy, we talked about this for a long time. I had to make my cross-examination apparently clear to Leighton, everyone listening, is that he sees verse 18 and 30 talking about two different kinds of glory. And that's a problem because why would we think that is what Paul is talking about when he is so clear about the kind of doxa that awaits for us as a future glory, as a future inheritance. Okay, and I keep using the word inheritance. if we have the Spirit of God within us that cries out, Abba, Father, the Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs. Okay, this is our inheritance that awaits us. The future inheritance, because we are adopted as sons and daughters, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we may also be glorified with him. My whole point, and if you go back to the cross-examination, I start out with context. And it really surprised me when I asked Dr. Flowers, is verse 17 and 18 talking about the same kind of glory? Whoever was keeping tally, that's where you got the first I don't know. And I was like, oh, this is about to be brutal, because I ain't stopping. I think Dr. Flowers thought if he said, I don't know, I'll look into that, I would move on. You got the apologetic dog wrapped around your ankle. I say all that in good fun. So anyway, all that to say is when I was thinking about my 10-minute opening statement, I just thought Leighton Flowers doesn't understand the golden chain of redemption. And I remember scratching my head thinking, what in the world about this whole business of, and we know, and for those? Like, so that was the first thing that blew my mind. I was like, really? Like, I get what he's saying is we as Christians can rest, I'm going to import a word, in the sovereignty of God, right? We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. You should have in mind Ephesians 1:11, that God works all things together after the counsel of his will. Okay, Paul, but how does that affect me personally as a Christian? Oh, well, here in verse 28, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. So going back to whoever said it earlier, I hope we can clip this. You have to understand Romans chapter 8 in order to understand Romans chapter 9. And what I mean is all things are working together for good for those who are the called according to his purpose. Now, the reason I'm making a big deal about the word called here is because, yes, that is in the golden chain. And let's see if we can do a cheat. My keyboard fell asleep on me. Okay, so you kind of see these words highlighted. So as we go into Romans chapter 9, and yeah, I love the ESV, because it says things like this, God's sovereign choice. But as we continue to kind of scan, so obviously this is a huge verse, and yes, I did preempt it in my opening statement. Let's see where we start. God's purpose of election might continue, not because of works, but because of God who calls. Golden chain, right? And so as you continue reading in Romans 9, you get the theme of the called. There it is, right? And this is so important because the elect standard version, exactly. Because Leighton wants Romans 9 to be hyper-Israel-centric. Now, obviously, there's some context about Israel. I'm not discounting that. Because remember, Romans 8, God's working all things. What's up, Eli? He said, what? Eli, I said a whole lot, man. But I do have some coffee. Which, by the way, if you haven't yet, flow over to Revealed Apologetics. Eli, I hope you appreciate this. I try to display. It's covered up. That's so funny. So y'all probably see my logo, but it's blocking this book right here. I need to get this in the shot, but Brother Eli really has helped me understand presuppositional apologetics. And so anyway, this goes all the way back to Cornelius Van Til. So let me go ahead and put this out of frame, apparently, where y'all can't even see it. Man, I really was excited to display that book to y'all. Jeremiah did a great job and crushed in his cross-examination. So did Eli. So go, Eli already was giving you a plug earlier on in our live stream. So anyway, we're talking about the called. And one of the things that I hope resonated with people is look, and listen, this is not unique with me. Dr. White taught me this, and I was starting to see the consistency. So he debated A.K. Richardson a year ago, and they were talking about Romans 9, and I noticed how much Dr. White emphasized glory, called, and then he would go back to the golden chain of redemption, and I'm like, that's so true. And this makes sense for how election is a mercy. And so that's another thing, some people say, yeah, you avoided Romans chapter 9, where it actually uses the word election. And I love it when people say that, because I'm like, oh, have you not read? Who shall bring any charge against God's elect? And so the elect are those whom God foreknew, those whom he predestined, called, justified, and glorified. And what's neat is Paul is identifying himself, right? And so like when he says, who shall bring any charge against God's elect? Who is to condemn? Christ Jesus is the one who died. More than that, he was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed is interceding for us. And so who are the pronouns? Who is Paul talking about here? And it's like, oh, let's go all the way to Romans chapter 8, verse 1. There is therefore now no condemnation. Oh, we've heard this before. For those who are in Christ Jesus. So those that are looking to Christ alone, by faith alone, that's the elect of God, right? That's why 2 Peter talks about if you want to make your calling of election more sure, well, pursue after Christ, right? Of what he has told us to lean into the body, lean into the virtues that Scripture has given us how to live our life, and that will renew your heart. So my point is, when Dr. Flowers says, for those, you get the shift in the context. It's like, no, he is talking about all believers of all time. So, of course, I'm going to take a long time explaining my points to y'all about how these things came about. So, when I read Dr. Flowers' book, I read it earlier, I knew, okay, 10 minutes, I can have maybe 5 major points, each link of the golden chain of redemption. And so something else that is really neat is maybe y'all have seen some of my Church of Christ Exile videos. I interviewed the Tennessee electrician, a really good friend of mine, Cameron Vogelsang, and he said the golden chain is kind of what led him out of Church of Christ theology. And once again, these are verbs that God is doing, right? God is the one that does this miraculous calling. He is the one that ultimately will bring us to glory. And it's like, if you have ears to hear, if you have eyes to see, this is a work of God. So that's essentially my argument to the Arminian. This isn't just talking about mere passive knowledge of God. It's something that he is doing. So that was a long way of me saying, after I read Dr. Flowers' book, I just knew in my heart of hearts that I wanted to make the debate about the golden chain of redemption. It by far is Dr. Flowers' weakest point, because he's ready to talk about John 6. We've heard him debate. He wrote his 3rd book on it. Eli says, my favorite quote from the debate is, Jeremiah, I know what you are trying to do. Oh, okay. So I remember saying this. Eli, I just got to say, it flows out of me. When I'm in debate mode, by the grace of God, I'm locked in. I realize you got to pull the audience along. But Eli said, my favorite quote from the debate is when I said to Leighton, I know what you're trying to do. It's not going to work. I think I even got Flowers to laugh a little bit. And he said, well, we'll judge that later. But that's a good debate, is when both interlocutors are able to have a little fun with one another. Like I said, so many people, they say so many hateful things to Flowers. Listen, he is a human being. I do think he is sharing his conviction, and we all think he is wrong. But it's at the end of the day, he preaches the same gospel. Now, I don't think he has the broader theological context to why the gospel is miraculous and powerful and regenerates hearts. And I don't think he can consistently have assurance of his salvation. But those are all secondary. And so I just want everyone to know, unashamedly, me, Dr. Flowers, and the babe of all babes, we got to pray before the debate even happened. And our prayer was that God's truth would be vindicated, that he would receive glory, that me and Dr. Flowers would be brothers, iron sharpening iron. And so, yeah, thanks, Eli, for tuning in. Hopefully, me and Eli will be doing some collaborations talking about his debate and hopefully my debate as well. So my point is, I just wanted y'all to know that very tactically, I realized that this was going to be I figured out that this was going to be my opening statement. And I was going to drive everything back to the golden chain of redemption. So another funny moment in the debate, y'all may have to help remind me how it was, but Dr. Flowers was asking me, is there mystery with God? And I'm like, yes, there's a degree of mystery with God who is eternal, omnipotent, knows all things, is all good. Yes, there's a degree of mystery, but then I snuck in there, but that doesn't mean that his revelation can't be clear. And so he didn't hear that part. And he was like, okay, so if there's mystery, then why can't we possibly be right that election is conditioned on faith? And I'm like, because that part is very clear in God's word. And then I don't remember how he transitioned, but he said, where in the New Testament does it teach that election is unconditional? And I think before he even got done asking the question, I said, Romans 8. And I don't think y'all could hear it, but the crowd just roared because it's like, where you been? That was my whole opening statement. And so I tried to get a little bit of mileage out of that, of just saying, look, you have to deal with the golden chain of redemption. And here's why. I don't know if someone asked earlier, but why would he not cross-examine me on my arguments? And here's what I was prepared for. Let me see if I can find it. So if you are familiar with the historic conversation, debate with unconditional election with Arminians and Calvinists, this is the key word. You have to be able to go to bat for this word foreknew. So what I thought Dr. Flowers was going to do, which, by the way, I know what he was going to do based on his book, is he was supposed to ask me about Romans 11, the remnant of Israel, because this is the only other time that we see Paul use the word foreknew. And so this is how the argument should have went. I asked then, Paul says, has God rejected his people? By no means, for I myself am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. And here's the contrast. You got rejected and foreknew, right? This is essentially received in a loving relationship in contrast to rejection. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. And so I'm fingers crossed. I'm hoping Dr. Flowers would like to have me on Soteriology 101, once again, to just model brotherhood, iron sharpening iron. But what he should have done, in my humble opinion, in the debate, is he should have been saying Jeremiah is foreknew here, not in relation to Israelites. Right? And so then that's where you got to build the case for how foreknew or for those of the past, blah, blah, blah. And I would say, no, that's not Paul's point here, is those whom God foreknew is talking about Paul. Because something you have to remember is what is said in Romans chapter 9, and I believe it is Romans 9, verse 6. But it is not as though the word of God has failed. Like, you got to think, this is the central thing that Paul is wanting his hearers to understand, which, by the way, his hearers are defined in Romans chapter 1. The word of God has not failed. In fact, Isaiah 40, the prophet Isaiah says God's word is everlasting. You got the grass of the field that perishes and fades away, but God's word is eternal. So there's a lot of connection going on there. For not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel. And so this is the same point that Paul is making in Romans chapter 11. Paul is saying, I am the elect foreknown by God within the broader circle of physical Israel. So my point is, if a lot of times the debate for unconditional election, you have to understand the word foreknew. And I would submit to you, if you think this is a action of God, you have to say that is what's going on. If you believe that this is an action of God that is entering into a kind of personal, loving relationship, then the Reformed side is where you land. It is the Arminians that want this to be more knowledge-based. So anyway, yeah. So like I said, that was the debate tactic. The strategy was I was going to ground anything and everything in these 3 verses right there. If Dr. Flowers wanted to talk about determinism, I'm going to say, what do you mean by that? And as he gives his philosophical garb, I'm going to say, oh, that just sounds like God works all things together. Well, you got to prove that. Okay, well, I can prove it from here. I can quote the prophet Isaiah, God declaring the end from the beginning. That is the concept of decree. God knows all things, sees all things. He has a purpose of all things before he created. That's the decree. And so as I was prepared for Flowers to maybe pivot to philosophy, which he did, his tactic was to grill me on the Lapsarian controversy, which, many of y'all maybe don't know me personally, but I'm all for it. To me, it's like, hey, let's dance in that world. And we got good brothers that are super Lapsarian, but I do think infra is the only way to be consistent with how Paul is developing his argument in the book of Romans. So my point is, yes, I'm going to drive everything back to the golden chain of redemption with the context that Paul has laid out right here. All things work together for good for those. Remember, what does verse 29 say? For those. So this is when you look in the Greek, this isn't necessarily there, but it's the same. It's the same for the Christians in verse 28 with all believers of all time. But my point is, you got to be consistent with the theme of called. Thank you, Michael Rogers, who is a member of the Apologetic Pound, the dog pound, if you will. Thank you so much for your $5 super chat. And so, Eli, are you asking me a question out there? Let's see. Let me put this on the screen for y'all. So Eli says, Jeremiah, okay, maybe you're interacting with someone. So Eli just says here, Jeremiah would ask a question and Leighton would challenge Jeremiah's interpretation, and then Jeremiah would ask, well, how do you know? Yeah. So maybe Eli was just kind of mentioning, so Leighton kind of has a pattern, and when everything, yeah, exactly. So yeah, so Leighton is a very sharp guy, but he's also really good about kind of diverting. And we all do this in many ways, so this is not a slam towards him. But when he's asked a question that he's not necessarily familiar with, he's going to shift to some of those old talking points, right? And so someone let me know on the side chat, how long have we been going for? I always try to do these live streams roughly 2 hours. I know we're just having so much fun, so I lose all track of time. Yes, Eli does hold to Reformed theology as a Baptist, because that is where the essence of Reformed theology actually goes, is not doing the sprinkling to babies, but it's okay if you do. Yeah, someone let me know how much time we've been going for. So tell me if this is accurate. We've been going for 1 hour and 30 minutes. Does that sound right to y'all? Yeah, Reformed Baptist, baby. Okay. Dunk 'em. So yeah, I just want to let you know, yes, very tactically, very strategic. I knew that this was the way to go. I knew that I could ground all my points. I could make a very strong defense for unconditional election with the golden chain. Everyone's complaint is, this doesn't teach unconditional election. Well, go study fornew. And if God is doing this along with all the other verbs, and here's where I have Leighton. He agrees that it's a chain. All of these verbs rise and fall together. And so he just makes a different move than the Arminian that tries to break up the chain and says it's basically a diamond being looked at from different facets I've heard before. But Leighton is done for if he thinks that the chain stands. And in his book, he says Calvinists are wrong that it refers to all believers, future saints. It's to past saints. So, you got to think, I wasn't arguing against an Arminian. So all of my debate prep strategy is against the king provisionist himself. And so to me, this is how you crack it wide open. Now, the benefit of this too is this is actually legitimately the foundation of Romans 9. And so it carries that called theme, that doxa glory theme. And so something else I wanted to say in Romans chapter 9 is you get into the clay, right? You got to think his whole picture on his book is the potter molding the clay. And so this is maybe where it's might be good to, I'll just read this. So remember, this is the whole thing right here, verses 19 through 21. Like, you don't realize that this is probably the heart of the debate itself. Yes, Michelle, thank you for saying this. She says, Dr. Edward Dowcor has an excellent 9-minute video on the golden chain of redemption. He breaks down the Greek. Yeah, if you don't mind, Michelle, find that video and post it in the side chat. I actually would like to read that. And I've messaged Dr. Edward Dowcor, and he would love to come on the Apologetic Dog Show. I haven't done an interview in a while, so that needs to happen. But in many ways, this is the heart of the Calvinist-Arminian debate. And in my opinion, it's just a little bit easier contending with a provisionist who kind of hasn't worked out all the kinks. You got to think, provisionism is like barely a few years old. And so it really is a house of cards if you know how to pull the right cards out, because Arminianism has stood the test of time in some ways against Calvinism. So I'm just saying you really got to be on one side or the other when it comes to these theological things. But you will say to me then, why does he still find fault? Okay? You got to think, the objectioner doesn't like that election, salvation in its entirety is a mercy. And yes, God is active in some way in hardening whomever he wills. And so, Dr. Flowers, this isn't just merely about Israel. And so, like I said, I think Romans 8 gets him off on a wrong trajectory. Thank you for posting that link, Michelle. And so, this is talking about any human being that stands against God and is questioning his ways. One of the best examples, I wish I studied this, I could have brought it up in the debate, but this is a Job 38 scenario. Remember, Job in the beginning had great theology and said, Lord, you give, you take away, blessed be the name of the Lord. But as he suffered, as he went through hurt and pain, he started to regret the day that he was ever born. Now, obviously, we all would be tempted to do the same things like Job. But he indirectly is questioning God. And so that's where Job 38, God's like, all right, Job, stand up, present yourself like a man. Now you answer me, where were you when I laid the foundation of the world? That's one of those moments where you're like, oh yeah, you're God. You are working all things together in a particular way according to the counsel of your will. And so that's kind of the point, whether a Jew is questioning God or Gentile. And so to me, that is the harder thing to defend, that this is a Jewish context only, and the application doesn't apply to the Gentile. You will say to me, why does God still find fault? For who can resist his sovereign will, right? This isn't necessarily his revealed will or moral will, which we do thwart and break and sin all the time. This is something different. Once again, what was said in Job realized, I think it was Job 42, that nothing can thwart the will of God. Nothing can thwart his sovereignty. Now, Leighton's just going to say, oh, well, you mean sovereignty is divine, meticulous determinism, blah, 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 blah. Well, if all you mean by that is, yes, God has an eternal decree and a purpose, a redeeming purpose for everything that comes to pass, well, great. That's just what the scripture teaches. For who can resist his will? But who are you, O provisionist? Who are you, O Jew? My whole point and kind of mocking there is, this is not saying, O Israel, O Jew. Now, here's the thing. Can you stick a Jew in that place? Yeah. Can you stick a Leighton Flowers right there? Yeah. Can you stick Jeremiah Nortier? Yeah. because it's O anthropos. So does anybody remember what I did to Dr. Flowers during the debate? I said, I tried to set him up, we had to keep going into verse 21. Who are you, O man, to answer back to God? Will what is molded say to its molder, why have you made me like this? So this is the premise of his book, right? The Potter's Promise. Has the potter no authority or right over the clay? Now you notice it's the potter making out. So this is so key. You can't say that God is not involved with those who reject God, because it all comes down to this lump of clay, right? God is at work, is my point. And like I said, I really thought Flowers was going to press me on all this. I think he knew the strategy was to be like, the called is linked back to the golden chain of redemption. But anyway, I really tried to study the nuances of Romans chapter 9. And so I'm just wanting everyone to know this is kind of the heart of the Romans 9 debate, is who is the lump of clay. So I remember I asked Dr. Flowers, I said, do you think the lump of clay is Israel or all of humanity fallen in Adam? So, without him, he was kind of looking, pulling up Romans chapter 9, but he very quickly, because he says in his book, he knows what he would say is it's Israel. And so I want to share with y'all a little bit debate strategy is you don't ask open-ended questions where you allow them time to pontificate and just eat away time. You have to ask specific questions, and you try to press for a yes or no, but let them give adequate explanations, right? But as time was winding down, instead of asking, well, who was the subject in verse 20? Because that's where he can just really eat your time and start quoting from earlier in Romans chapter 9. So notice what I asked. What was the vocative noun in verse 20? Now you got to think, is that an unfair question? No, because if you answer it correctly, you look like, oh man, you know the Greek well. Now, if you don't know the Greek well, okay, no problem. Leighton could have asked me a number of Greek questions. I'd have been like, I'm not sure. Please tell me so I can understand the context, because it's okay if you don't know the Greek, but you still have to account for the Greek in your theological paradigm. My point is, I didn't want to ask him a question that allowed him to pontificate. So I just asked him, what's the vocative noun? It's oh man, anthropos. And so this is where I do want to shift kind of in our winding down 30 minutes or so here is I wanted to drive it back to Adam in Romans chapter 5. So I wanted to show y'all my potential questions. Can y'all see that up here for Dr. Flowers? Everything was going to be driven back to the golden chain of redemption. So maybe I can pause before we do that. Does anybody have any questions, or did I miss a super chat? Let me go back. So thank you, Michael Rogers, again. And I do believe I read James' super chat. He loved the debate. If you want to understand Romans 9, you have to understand Romans 8. And so Eli says, yes, he did not know the vocative noun. Weird, given that he is a professor and should have been able to answer that. So, yeah, I want to be charitable to Dr. Flowers. Oh, yeah, we need one more super chat before we get our giveaway. And like I said, we're only going to go, we might tip over the 2-hour mark. We're just having fun. We got to talk about the the debate, right? And I still got some Squirrelly Joe's coffee, so while I still have that, we're going to be doing a live stream. Yeah, I think what Dr. Flowers will walk away is you got to be careful. You got to be careful posturing yourself as the guru, the one who is the doctor with the PhD. And here's my beef. He made a lot of technical Greek arguments here. And yes, if I ask an obscure Greek question, everyone's going to see that I'm just kind of grasping for straws. But he should have known that one. He should have known that what is the subject, essentially, in the verse right before about what is the clay. But it's, oh man, so that's the debate. He wants, oh man, to be, oh Israel. And he's missed it, because even in his book, he went with the translation that says, "O human being" or "a human being." And I love the generality of that because we are fallen in Adam. We are created from the dust. Who are you, oh man, to ever question God in a way that would imply that he is morally at fault? You are wrong. Eli Yala in his debate, I think he quoted this against Dan Barker, and it's one of my favorite quotes. I think it does kind of go back to Cornelius Van Til. But the unbeliever, let's just say the objectioner in Romans chapter 9, you're slapping God in the face when you are questioning him in his ways or if you're blaspheming him. But you can't even do that unless the Creator God is holding you in his hands, meaning that you couldn't even make your objection if God is not omnipotent and sovereign over all things. He is sustaining your very existence. That's why Acts chapter 17 says that we live and move and have our being, our existence in him, right? Because he is eternal and he upholds the universe by I think it's the Rhema there in Hebrews, but by the word of his power. And so the objectioner, you have to look at it broadly as man fallen in Adam. So, yeah, to Eli's point is, that is a related on-topic question. It was very interesting. I think Flowers was a little rattled by all of these questions leading up to the vocative noun question. So, like I said, the strategy, if you will, I'm unashamed to tell people I had a tactic and a strategy, and it was to ground the best verse that clearly articulates the sovereignty of God and unconditional election in a way that's going to get Dr. Flowers off of his script. We all got scripts. We all got lanes. We all have our talking points, things that we enjoy doing. And so it's not a slam against him, but I've been listening to the Flower Patch Kids for a long time, and I kind of understand what they're going to say in Ephesians chapter 1 and certain talking points in Romans chapter 9. So guess what? We're going to talk about context for glorified. Now you got to think, in Dr. Flowers' minds, that is a chain. So glorified is linked to foreknew. And so please, let anyone under the sun tell me that I talked about things that were unrelated, and then you will show me someone who either doesn't understand Paul's flow of argument leading up to the golden chain, or you got someone that is hardcore coping. Doesn't matter to me. So I just wanted to show you my notes, though. And I wanted to also tell myself, Jeremiah, don't cut him off. Don't treat Dr. Flowers like Don K. Preston. That was one of the hyper-preterists that me and Dr. Frost debated like a month ago. Those are rank heretics. And so when I asked them a question and then they started going somewhere else, redefining terminology, I interrupted them so fast and didn't let them get away with jack diddly squat. But my point is, my prayer with Dr. Flowers is, Jeremiah, be patient with him. Ask good questions, setting the garden path. He said there are trap questions, and that was one of my favorite. I've had people say, Jeremiah, what did you think about that interaction about trap questions? I said, look, we're grown men. We're having a good time. And so he said, Jeremiah, you're just asking me trap questions. He was doing his hands like Mr. Krabs. You're asking me just little trap questions about Romans 8, and then you're just really, jumping. I said, of course I'm asking you trap questions because in my humble, unbiased opinion, I didn't say that, you don't understand Romans 8. Okay, so I'm going to nail Dr. Flowers on glorified, right? And so this right here is a quote from his book, which was weird because when I asked him this question, is the glorified conditioned on perseverance through suffering? He didn't really give me a straight answer because if you remember, I just said, sounds like we agree on that. Sounds like a yes. Because here's the quote from his book. Because in his book, he actually, this is weird. It's like he forgot what he wrote because he actually, in his book, makes a case for how verse 17 is different than verse 30. That's why when I was reading it, I'm like, oh. Yeah, so appreciate rational logic. He says, yeah, anyone saying that Jeremiah was off topic is simply uneducated about the topic of unconditional election. Well, I appreciate you saying that. It's funny how clear it is for us. Like, it's called the golden chain of redemption. And that video I referenced earlier in the live stream, that's a part of my testimonial of coming to the Reformed heritage, Reformed theology. And I would play it for you. I don't think y'all would be able to hear it. But this video right here, if y'all go check it out, once again, this is Grace Family Baptist Church. How did the apologetic dog become a Calvinist? I'll give you a primer here. I grew up at a traditional Southern Baptist church. One might say that I used to be a proto-provisionist. And I was taught two things. I was taught that we are saved by grace alone, through faith alone, and Christ alone. So by God's grace, I was taught the right gospel. But I was also taught once saved, always saved. What up, truth defenders? And I was always plagued with this conundrum is, okay, how do I have security in my salvation? It cannot be lost. But if it was my decision to follow Christ, my decision, my free will, how do I not then still have the same free will to walk away? That was something I could never square in my mind, and I've researched people's explanation of that. It still does not math in my brain. The math does not math. And so I was always like, I see the scriptures. I see John 10 about the good shepherd that doesn't lose, any of that the Father has given him, and we cannot be plucked out of his grasp. So I was all in on once saved, always saved. We take issue with that terminology sometimes. And then even the tail end of Romans 8 about nothing in all of creation can separate us from the love of God. And that is a very specific redemptive love. So in this video, I talk about how it was Romans 8, where I realized, my salvation. Now, the word predestined is what stood out to me. It wasn't foreknew and understanding all of the chain. But I was captivated by this truth that I believe, that my salvation didn't start with my decision, didn't start with my free will, but it started with God in eternity past who predestined me or anyone that loves Christ. And it's like an epiphany. The light bulbs went off and I was born again. And I didn't have the terminology of Calvinism to put on it. But I realized that this is a work of God. I have the triune grip around my soul, and that's why I can't lose my salvation. And what Johnny Mack said a long time ago, I love it. He just said, if you could lose your salvation, you would. So anyway, check out that video for anybody that's tuning in. So anyway, I was going to talk with Dr. Flowers. Here's the thing about his provisionism in the context of Romans 8. People that say that I was off topic for talking to him about what Paul means by glorified, if you get into those endless, mindless conversations with people and YouTube side chats or Facebook groups, just remind them that Leighton asked me about the Lapsarian controversy. How does that prove his position of conditional election? I'm not faulting Flowers for doing that. I'm just saying the people that are mad at me of going off topic, well, fine. Your hero on the other side didn't do that either. But here's the thing. Debate is about pushing your opponent's position for logical consistency. I don't know if Eli's still in the chat, but you have to do what we would call the internal critique. I think cross-examination is saying, okay, for the sake of argument, let's grant your position. Now, how do you explain X, Y, and Z? Obviously on topic, but I believe you can't get more central to unconditional election than the golden chain of redemption. Everyone that doesn't see it as a golden chain, maybe they see it disconnected. And, well, that would, yes, Eli's still in the building. And so maybe, Eli, you can speak to this. Maybe, and now your debate was very worldview oriented. But during cross-examination, I'm wanting to internally critique my opponent's position. And so I'm granting provisionism and then asking Leighton to explain context. Now, another tactic of mine is I want to get him off his script. I want to get him off his talking points on things I've never heard him talk about. And like I said, the context of Romans chapter 8. And so this is what I was looking at right here, right? Trying to lay the garden path, as Nate Sala from Wise Disciple said, which, by the way, if anybody knows Nate Sala, Wise Disciple, like on Twitter, please tell him to review our debate. How awesome was that? What up, CHU? I just want to call you Chu. Chu said, great debate. Doggo, thank you. Woof, woof, woof. And so the apologetic Dane, now she is cooking. Now she knows that the babe of all babes. So anyway, back to my sheet over here. So here's the garden path that Nate Sala, once again, go tell Nate Sala we need him to, and here, if Nate did a review of the debate, I think he would give props to Leighton in ways. I think he would give me props in ways. I think he probably would critique me for not just hitting the main proof text for unconditional election. But my hope is Nate would understand strategy for a debate. So as that garden path is being laid, you notice I was really wanting to key in on Leighton. Is it the same kind of glory for verses 17 and 18? Now, you see how I have the yes is what I'm getting at. But I wanted Leighton to be able to explain his answer, like I was saying earlier. If he needed time to explain, Jeremiah, you got 20 minutes. I had 3 lines of questioning that I really wanted to press into Leighton on, and I thought, you got 20 minutes to do it. So if you need him to expound, or like, don't cut him off like you did Don K. Preston. So, like I said, I got the first I don't know pretty early, and I wasn't expecting the I don't know to at least here with Abraham. But when I asked him, is it the same glory in verse 17 and 18, Flowers said, I don't know. And I thought, okay. And I kind of stammered a little bit because I was just like, oh, this is so easy. And so I just said, I kind of read verse 17 into 18. He's like, yeah, we agree. Sorry, I'm observing some of y'all's side chat comments there. And so this is where I could see it in his eyes when I asked him about Abraham. Now, you notice Abraham is central in the scripture, and rightly so. What up, Chu, again saying, I did kind of want 2 rebuttals. They seem so short. Oh, man. And they seem so short in my seat. There were a lot of I don't knows in the cross X. Eli Yala is reminding us. But Chu, it flew by. And I'm going to show y'all all the questions. I know I'm long-winded, but it makes for a good live stream, okay? But my point is, you want to centralize a lot of, the scripture centralizes a lot of teaching points, a lot of doctrines around Abraham. And if you follow the Apologetic Dog Ministry, how I evangelize the Church of Christ, it revolves around how Abraham was justified by faith, right? And so this is a perfect point because remember, Dr. Flowers' whole thing is past saints. The golden chain is the Calvinists are so right. It's a chain, but y'all just have misunderstood it to be all believers rather than past believers or past saints. And so I'm like, oh, let's talk about Abraham and see what pumps out the other end. So I asked him, when Abraham lived on earth, did he persevere through suffering? And Dr. Flowers was already looking at me kind of dazed, like, I'm sure he did. And I'm thinking, literally, the man's whole life when he was called, back in Genesis 12, his whole life was one of suffering. Hebrews 11 talks about how he lived in tents for crying out loud. You know what I mean? So anyway, to me, it was a very intuitive, yes, he did suffer. And you notice what he said? Yes. And then this is the question of all questions in this debate for me. It's funny because I knew I wanted to ask this question back in October, but it took me a long time to figure out how I wanted to build to this question. Some of my strategy was going to Romans 14:13 first, and it felt like it was too long-winded of how I wanted to dip that back into the context of Romans 8 with the golden chain. But to me, this was the thing that I knew Leighton affirmed, and I just didn't know how I wanted to bring it up to show his inconsistency in Romans chapter 8. And notice what I said. He has to say yes. He might fight back and say not necessarily. See, aren't you glad I do these live streams? Y'all get a peek into the apologetic dog mind of how I was bringing this up. So I'm trying to read what y'all are saying in the side chat. Ali said no for slandering. So what is going on? Is somebody slandering out there? Read Leighton's book. I was talking to Aaron so I'm kind of giving something away maybe he's working on. Oh, did somebody get booted? Were they slandering? That wasn't nice what they did. So Aaron, he was asking me questions about Leighton's book because he has a clip of James White and Dan Barker about "Don't quote me, bro." And so he wants to make a clip about something Leighton said in our debate of me quoting his book and then him saying that it was basically irrelevant. Anyway, you are cracking me up in the side chat. So someone said, I emailed Nate a link to the debate. Thank you. Okay. I have a task for everyone. I need you to hit up Dr. James White on Twitter, X, and say, hey, you need to have the apologetic on a radio-free Geneva to talk about the golden chain of redemption. Guys, yes, I have his number. I don't want to ask him personally, but that would be a dream come true for me. And maybe give it a little bit of time. And Dr. Flowers has already been asking me some of the context of Romans 8. I want to give him major props. He's told me he's reconsidering maybe his stance. And like I said, no pressure to him. I know he is written and all these things, but I'm hoping Dr. Flowers has me on to talk about foreknew, talk about something related, maybe even Deneen's not on X. I wasn't on X either until last year. Dr. White shamed me for not having one, so I had to get one. Deneen, the reason why I say X is because apparently he reads everything on X that he's tagged in. So that's probably the best way to let people know. At the end of the debate, I had to guess the view of each debater on the topic. That's what Steven said. So maybe let me know what you mean. Maybe if you go back and listen to opening statements, we kind of gave our case. And I definitely showed you why I thought the golden chain teaches unconditional election, because these are verbs that God is doing, not man, not conditioned on what we do, but that started with God, he foreknew. Not what he foresaw, but what he foreknew. Romans 9 says, vessels of mercy prepared beforehand. And I'm saying if you look into the etymology of foreknew, it means choose beforehand. And then I said Romans 1 tells us how far the beforehand goes back, before the foundation of the world. Now, you don't have to have to agree with me in that. But when people say that I veered off topic, I'm like, why did I give an opening statement? I guess I was just speaking to myself. Stephen, to your defense, you said I missed your opening statement. To be fair, well, my guy, go back and listen. I'm just teasing. All right, back to what I had prepared. So I'm showing y'all what I had in front of me with Dr. Flowers. So I wanted to centralize it around Abraham because remember, Dr. Flowers said that the golden chain is about past saints. So that has to incorporate Abraham. But Jeremiah, he may fight back and say not necessarily. He didn't fight back. And so this was this is the quote that I was ready. Y'all saw me having some fun with Dr. Flowers when he said, yeah, Abraham is glorified, like in verse 30 in some way. And I told him, well, I was prepared to quote your book if you didn't say yes. Remember, he said the past tense suggests that Paul is referring to former generations of those who have loved God and who now, even as Paul was writing these words, and to me this is the hardest pill to swallow, are already glorified in his presence. I actually want to take a moment because some people will say, Jeremiah, do you not believe that Abraham is glorified in any sense right now? That did not help me. My keyboard is asleep. So I was prepared for a lot of these questions, right? And so, yes, I know to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And that is a truism, the intermediate state. You got to think, the apologetic dog studies eschatology. But the question is, what is the context of the Apostle Paul in defining glory, right? Believe it or not, me and Keith Foskey actually talked about this point quite extensively because he had a golf cart dialogue with Leighton Flowers. And I think Keith said something that really made me be like, oh, I think he agrees with Leighton that glorified is being transformed from one degree of glory to another, like in 2 Corinthians. What is it? Someone help me out. In 2 Corinthians, 3:18, I believe it is. But that's a verse in reference to sanctification, right? Being transformed from one degree of glory to the next. And so here's the thing. Here in this life, so Romans chapter 6, verse 22, I believe, the fruit of our justification leads to sanctification and its end, eternal life. So in Romans, Paul is very specific on what he means of glory attached to our future blessed hope and our inheritance to Christ. And so I was prepared for Leighton to probably say that, oh man, this was so good. The Lord bless my study and prep. I was ready for Flowers to try to say, well, Abraham is present with the Lord, absent from the body, is present with the Lord. And I'm like, okay, that is true. But number one, that's not the context of Romans 8. And when people have been saying, but do you think Abraham is glorified? I want to say no. Abraham is in the glory of God. He is in the presence of God, and God is glorious, and he is in that presence. And here's what Hebrews chapter 12 says, talking about the heavenly Jerusalem in Mount Zion, right? This is and this is the text that I go to say that the church has existed of all time, which is all believers. This predates the new covenant, but this is the heavenly Jerusalem. This is where the spirits of the righteous made perfect. And so what I would concede to is when we depart from this world and we go to be with the Lord, the spirits are no longer in the presence of sin, and there's not sin going on. And so if we try to say that they are glorified in any sense, okay, well, it's still awaiting the future glory of Romans chapter 8, which is bodily resurrected glory. So in my study time, I realized, okay, you got to drive the point that he has split verse 18 and 30 to talking about different kinds of glory. And you got to figure out a way. How do you make it punchy? I read a book called, it talked about sticky ideas. It's a secular book, but it's talking about communication. Anyway, it'll come to me. But it was like, you have to make things sticky. Things that land and resonate with people. And I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I characterize rightly Flowers' view of, okay, if he thinks Abraham is glorified now, what would I call that? And it hit me like a ton of bricks. Verse 30, he is calling disembodied glory. Oh yeah, we're here. So this was right here. That I'm just saying, as I was sparring with ChatGPT, I uploaded Flowers' book into chat, and I told ChatGPT to pretend to be Leighton Flowers, and we would go to town. And anytime chat would make a good point, because you got to think it's just lightning fast, it would make wrong points. I said, no, you can't make that point because of the book. And it realized that it was boxed in a corner with some of these questions. But I think it was ChatGPT that said, yes, it's plausible that Abraham is in a disembodied glory. And when I read that, I thought, oh, that is perfect. That is a sticky idea that people are going to feel, even Dr. Flowers. And it's funny, I think it was in a little bit of a daze. Because when I talked about disembodied glory, he's like, I've never heard of that. I'm like, yeah, because that's your view. And something that was so comical is he was like, has anybody ever heard of disembodied glory? And he was like pointing at the audience, and everyone in a red Apologetic Dog t-shirt raised their hand, smiling, just cheesing hard. And he was like, of course you Calvinists have heard of that. Twitchy said, well done with that. Had to take him to the woodshed. Well, I want to give props to Twitchy because me and Twitchy talked about this for a long time. I talk his ear off of trying to strategize of how to press the point that Leighton has redefined the golden chain. And he does that the clearest with a doxyson or glory there. And once again, Leighton's view locks in that it's a chain, so it rises and falls together. So, yeah, so here, remember the line of questioning is Abraham glorified now? And I was trying to get him to say yes to a degree. He did. And so I said, that's kind of crazy because Paul goes on to tell us about that glory is the redemption of our bodies. Now, someone says, in what sense couldn't Abraham be with God glorified, awaiting? Yeah, well, that's the whole point is Hebrews 12 tells us that the Spirit's made perfect. He is in the glory of God where there is no longer sin. But that's not the glory of Romans chapter 8. So, Stephen, you may not be a fan of kind of Reformed theology, and that's fine. But please realize that Romans 8 is not merely talking about past saints. And so, yes, he would be, and that's the whole thing. The golden chain is talking about the certainty that believers will receive an everlasting inheritance. So maybe that's what you believe. I'm just kind of glancing in the side chat. And so this is the terminology Scripture gives us. To be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord. You go to be in the heavenly Jerusalem where the spirits of the righteous are made perfect, no longer sin, awaiting a future bodily resurrection. And so, yeah, so this is where I wanted to press Leighton on. Has Abraham, so this is where I told Twitchy, probably back in October, I said this has to be the build-up, is if I ask Leighton, has Abraham been resurrected from the dead? And here's the wild thing, and I think I'm remembering this correctly, but Leighton didn't give a hard no. It's like he was entertaining the idea that Abraham had received the redemption of his body. So this is actually what I want to tell you. I was sad for Dr. Flowers because when we go back, let's see. Yeah, okay. When you go back to verse 23 of Romans chapter 8, there's something else said in this verse that's really important. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have, okay, and this is the key, the first fruits of the Spirit, grown inwardly as we await eagerly for the adoption of sons, the redemption of our body. So, first fruits means we have the deposit of the Holy Spirit. Ephesians 1 says that seals us to the day of redemption. First fruits, a lot of times, is grounded in Jesus Christ. He is the first fruits, 1 Corinthians 15, as being risen from the dead. And guess what? That's what he's talking about here in verse 23, our physical bodies. All right, Jeremiah, Mr. Calvinist, how in the world would you prove that? Well, verse 11, and this is where, had Leighton pressed me at all in Romans 8, I was hoping he would because he was about to get a master class on context. If the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his Spirit who dwells in you. So, Stephen, in the side chat, this is the whole point. That is referring to bodily resurrection. Those people died again later, like Lazarus. Yes, Lazarus had a bodily resuscitation, but he died again, Romans chapter 6, that Jesus was raised from the dead, never to die again. And so we're being promised that we one day will be raised like Christ, never to die again. That is the future glory of the golden chain of redemption. So all that's important in understanding this context. And so point is, you don't go full preterist. What's the quote? Can't remember which movie says it, but you don't go full preterist, right? And so Leighton has to say no, even though he was very hesitant to commit to anything. And that's why you heard me in the debate saying, Leighton, he has not been resurrected from the dead, okay? And so he did what I anticipated. Yeah, but he to be absent from the body is, you never go full preterist. So he did exactly what I anticipated. Yeah, but Abraham is absent from the body, present with the Lord. And I said, okay, so that sounds spiritual. Do you believe that Abraham's spirit is glorified now? Man, I thought he was cooked in this moment because he has now clearly divorced the context of verse 18 connected with 23 and verse 30. So like that's where I had him. Remember, I asked him, are you saying Abraham's spirit is glorified? Right? And that's where he knows, yeah, that's the whole point. And you know, we grapple about, are they glorified? Well, if you want to talk about the spirit being glorified, that's just not proper because you don't have the body. And what it means to be human is body and soul. And so just use the terminology of Scripture, the spirits of the righteous made perfect. And so that perfect is in the context of there no longer being sin. And I was going to milk this for as much as I needed to. So I wanted to try to get him. Twitchy said, Abraham is glorified, but still waiting on a more glorified glory, LOL. Yeah, me and Twitchy tried to think of ways to really drive the point. Okay, your initial point in the book was these aorist verbs are evidence for past saints, and yet now you're saying it's looking to a future glory. Well, thank you. You're just borrowing from our... Chrome said 50% glorified. It's hilarious. So you see here, I was going to milk this point until it landed. Thank you, Matthew, for another super chat. Do you see this is a good question. Matthew, don't let me forget to answer this. I want to get to a stopping point in this chain of questioning because this is the question you just asked me is a kind of question that Leighton should have asked your boy. So hold that super chat, if you will. Best I can offer you is 45% glory. Guys, y'all are savages out there. So I really wanted this to land with Leighton. I think it did. And I really wanted to land with the audience. I got to tell you something funny. And I do mean this in jest, so people don't take this so, to heart. But I told people, Leighton has a disadvantage in this debate, and some people I've told this, and they're like, yeah, but he's a scholar. He's written books. I'm like, I get it. I'm not saying I'm smarter than the guy, but I get to study all of what he's ever said, and I get to read what he has in writing, and he's probably bound to, hopefully not on this subject. But he has no idea where I'm coming from. And now, listen, I tried hard to give Leighton resources. I said I debated A.K. Richardson on libertarian free will. I debated a Lutheran on double predestination. I sent those resources to him. I said I genuinely affirm Dr. White's position on the potter's freedom, the God who justifies. I think I sent him some more stuff. And so I was trying to give Leighton also resources, right? And he found some of my lectures at 12.5 Church on the Second London Baptist Confession of Faith. That's where he grilled me on the Lapsarian controversy, which I was all for talking about. Tactically, I think he lost all the provisionists in the room. Maybe not. Maybe some of them understood. But I didn't think it was a good tactic, even though I loved having that conversation. People asked, he's has a doctorate. It's like, yeah, but he doesn't know where I'm going. And I told people the way that I was picturing in my mind the cross-examination is that he has to survive 20 minutes with the apologetic dog in the kennel, and he can't go anywhere. And some people tell me he didn't survive the 20 minutes. That is for the audience to judge. But my point is, I went into this thinking, how do you get around this conundrum right here without special pleading? Now, something that worked out so great is, I don't remember what he accused me of special pleading. He said I was special pleading when I said man is not God. I'm like, how is that special pleading? Like, God is defined in his word, transcendent, eternal. Man is not. Man does not have an eternal decree. He does not have an exhaustive purpose, blah, 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 blah. So it's funny, when he used special pleading, I thought, oh, just wait, because I'm about to accuse you of special pleading with this disembodied glory. Verse 30. Okay, I do want to pause because we got a super chat question. I really appreciated it. Because like I said, I could almost see this being relevant to the debate. Had Dr. Flowers basically engage with the flow of argumentation, because I don't want to be uncharitable saying this, but he didn't address my arguments, I felt like. He studied Ephesians 1, props to him. He studied Romans 9, props to him. But sorry, someone texted me, told me thank you for the debate. Where was my train of thought? Someone help me out. I don't feel like... So in his rebuttal, you're supposed to rebut things that were said in the opening. And I tried to rebut what was said. I remember I was just making bulleted notes like from him. Matthew 22 with the parable of the wedding feast. I was like, check, I'm ready to talk about that parable in its context. He, in my mind, misquoted Ephesians 1. I'm like, oh, we're going to talk about that. And then when he talked about Romans 9, I'm like, what? No, Romans 8? Okay. I'm going to remind everyone you got to understand Romans 8 if you want to understand Romans 9. My point is, he did not rebut any of my opening statement that I can remember. So if I am wrong, I want to own that. And so if he was paying attention to my opening statement, I made a big deal about the golden chain of redemption, and then I questioned and I quoted his book on the glory there, right? So Matthew says, do you see the glory in Romans 9:4 as the same glory mentioned in Romans chapter 8? So let's read this. And before I read this, I want to say, once again, this is an interesting shift in context, okay? And like how would I prove that case? So remember in Romans 8 verse, I think I can do this quickly. So you got brothers mentioned a number of times in the book of Romans. And so I think this is Romans 12. Okay, not yet. I think it's Romans, 8 verse 12. So then, brothers, right? And this is the brothers back in Romans chapter 1 that's talking about kind of all saints of all times, the gospel going forth to all the nations and referring to the called and loved by God, brothers, Jew and Gentile that are at Rome. And so that's really important. And that's my point against David Allen. I read his book, studying for this too. And so then you had the brothers in the golden chain among many brothers. Now I'll just say this is all believers of all time, right? And so in Romans chapter 9, you get a major shift with brothers being qualified by my kinsmen according to the flesh. Okay, so I'm just saying that Paul is doing a great job here. I know that, chapter divisions aren't inspired. As much as I would love for God's sovereign choice to be inspired, that's not in the original text. So, Matthew, what I'm getting at is saying Paul is trying to pivot to basically saying, look, God's word has not failed, and this is key. Not all Israel are of Israel, okay? So, just to answer your question, no, I don't think it's necessarily talking about the same glory here. Why? So he's talking about his brothers according to the flesh. So this is Old Covenant Israel. And before I give the explanation, Thomas Schreiner and Douglas Moo were probably the best commentators that I read, because I spent days coming through Romans 8 through 11, making sure I understood the flow of thought, I understood the context, because I'm about to go against the king of the provisionists on these types of things. And so they are Israelites, and to them belong the adoption, okay, the glory, the covenants, the law, the worship, and the promises, okay? And so the glory that I think about, a lot of commentaries mention this, that, thanks so much for your super chat. I'm going to read it in a second. I think the glory that a lot of commentators said here is when God revealed himself as a pillar of a pillar of cloud leading the Israelites in the wilderness and so forth. I think there's Old Testament references that refer to that as the glory of God that dwelt in the temple and so forth. And that's why we will be glorified when we receive redeemed physical bodies, spiritual bodies, as 1 Corinthians 15 talks about. Well, we will be with the presence of God, the glory. And so this is more of a reference to the presence of God. Hopefully that was helpful to you. Matthew, let me know if you have another question about that. And so DW, let's bring up another super chat. Thank you for that support. Hopefully you can read it on your end. Romans 9:4 reinforces Romans 8 by distinguishing temporary covenant glory from decree-grounded unbreakable glorification. Amen, brother. So yeah, I mean, can you make the case that they're related? Absolutely. I was wanting to show that there is a context, right? That's the word that I think really gave Leighton trouble and fits. So, yep, thank you for saying that. Okay. How are we doing on time? I know we've been going for a while, but we've been having so much fun. We're at the 2 hour and 25 minute mark. Maybe, I hate to do it, but maybe that is a good place to call it for this evening. And we'll just do another live stream. I've been doing live streams on Sunday evenings. This has been a lot of fun. And so maybe we'll just pick up what about anywhere in the book of Romans, right? To avoid the special pleading of disembodied glory. And maybe next time I will talk about the strategy of Romans 4:13 and how Leighton said, I wasn't prepared to talk about that because I thought we were talking about unconditional election. What was interesting to me is how Dr. Flowers didn't seem to like when Dr. James White was telling the moderator he didn't want to talk about reprobation in relation to infants. And so I told everyone leading up to the debate, all right, Chu, you said worth a shot. Please let me know if I missed something on my end. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to miss something if that was on me, but maybe that was in reference to something else. So Matthew said it seems like Flowers could have made the case that Romans 8:30 glory is pointing back to the glory of that the Jews had. My only issue is that he says they are being conformed to the image of Christ, so not all Old Testament Jews. Yeah, well, yeah, I thought through that through layers, and like I said, got to look at the context of Romans 8 and how that is foundational to Romans chapter 9. What I love about Matthew, even though we disagree on much, I love how you were open to saying, hey, the Word of God wins at the end of the day. You can get a t-shirt, and this is kind of new to the Apologetic Dog, and so let me pull it up on my end. And like I said, let me get it going here. Okay, so if you go to the Apologetic Dog, you can, if you sign up to become a member, there are 3 tiers, 3 levels of membership. And here's the thing. People get mad at me for why do you make content that you got to pay for? Listen, I have to raise money, and I don't know how to do that other than to potentially write books.
Okay,
It's disorienting hearing. My wife can sing, by the way.
Yes, I can.
All right, where was I? So, if you want a shirt, one way that I'm raising funds for the Apologetic Dog is you can become a member, and maybe you can't see this on your end as well. So tell me if you can see the 3 levels here. I think you can see that, surely. I'll zoom back out if you can't. But anyway, you can become a bronze member. Oh, I was saying that I'm trying to raise support, right? Dan Chapa. Oh, yeah. I called Dan and Turretin Fan in my debate prep. And Dan told me, as a classic Arminian, that his lips were sealed and he would not share any of my questions with the provisionist side. So what up? I cannot wait to hear what Dan has to say. Dan's going to be like, if Jeremiah would only better understand foreknew. Now, thanks for dropping by. We are winding things down. And I just want to let people know, if you would like to support the Apologetic Dog, bronze membership is $3.99. And this is just a general thank you to the Apologetics ministry. I put something in there like, it buys me a cup of coffee of Squirrelly Joe's coffee, by the way. Like how I worked that in there. Now, silver membership is $8.99, and I'm trying to create weekly content for members only, and this starts at the silver membership. I actually have a video I'm probably going to work on tomorrow, because I'm going to do a short video of something else that Leighton says in his book that wasn't brought up in the debate, and to me, it's wild what he says, and you want to know about it. And I'm going to do like probably a 30-minute video saying he says this, and he knows that this is indefensible in a way. But I think his, what's a nice way of saying his hatred's too strong. But his hardenedness towards Reformed theology prevents him from seeing his own inconsistency and so forth. So like I said, I'm going to be doing some membership content every week. And that starts with the silver membership. And here's what I was going to say. If you would like to support the Apologetic Dog and get a t-shirt, gold membership, I have the details here. If you sign up for gold membership, which is $24.99, me and the Apologetic Dame, will mail you a free t-shirt, and then you get access to member-only videos and something else that will begin in the near-ish future. I just got to figure it out, is member-only live streams. And so that will be for silver and gold membership, along with sending you a t-shirt. All right. Well, we got to cut it off at some point. I just want to thank everybody for your super chats. I think we had 20. So thank y'all so much. That is going to help me out so much. I would really like to debate Dr. Flowers again, mainly because of how respectful he is. Let me know. What would you like to send in the comments? And maybe even after this video is done live streaming, let me know what you would like to see us debate about. Like I said, my vote would be on judicial hardening, potentially Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. Can the unregenerate please God? Things like that. But thank you all so much for your support. And before we sign off, I want to just remind y'all that we have a new sponsor of Squirrelly Joe's. And so, yes, I have a commercial that is being edited by my producer, who likes to be in the shadows and doesn't like to be named. And so be looking forward to just hearing a lot about Squirrelly Joe's coffee. I met Squirrely Joe himself at a conference that I spoke at. Wonderful guy. He said, hey, I've been watching the Apologetic Dog ministry, praying for your brother. And so the fact that he reached out and wants to be a support in this way is a huge blessing. And so with that, have a blessed rest of your evening.